A lot for us to dig into. MSNBC senior national security reporter David Rode is here on set with me, and thankfully an MSNBC person officially. Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic. He's also an MSNBC political contributor. And Barbara McQuaid, a former U.S. attorney and professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She's also an MSNBC legal analyst, pros one and all. David, I'll come to you first. Just walk us through what we can expect from Comey today.
Was mentioned already, but it's a motion that will argue that the prosecution of Comey is selective and vindictive. The selective part is that has anyone else faced a charge like this? Is it really unprecedented or not? And vindictive, and this is the interesting part, in a sense, politically, the extraordinary role of Donald Trump publicly calling for these charges to be brought. The fact that the career prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia, as far as we've been told, didn't feel there was enough of a case here to bring it. He then ousts one person there and then brings in his former personal attorney, Lindsay Halligan. So that's what we expect. And, we don't know how the judge in the case will rule. And even if the judge rules one way or another, this can be appealed and go to a higher court. Yeah, so it's likely just the first chapter in a very long book that we're going to see written here in regards to Comey. But Barb, what do you see as the potential strength of these claims that the prosecution was vindictive? That's one that is typically hard to succeed on the merits of. But in this instance, it does feel like it has a point. And then the other piece of it, which is that Halligan herself not only has no prosecutorial experience, but they're charging that potentially she's in her role illegally. And thusly, that could erode the legitimacy of this case even further, right? Talk to us about what you see here.
Yes, vindictive prosecution can be very difficult to prove because prosecutors enjoy an enormous amount of discretion under our constitutional separation of powers. Ordinarily, it comes in a case where prosecutors say, because you exercise your right to appeal, we're going to crack down and bring more serious charges against you. So it is retaliating against someone for exercising a known legal right. The theory Jim Comey has here is a little bit novel, which is, the right he was exercising was just the right to do his job or to speak out. It's a little bit separate from the rest of the case. And so this one might be an uphill battle. But the appointment issue, I think, is a very strong argument. There are three ways a U.S. attorney can be appointed. One way is with Senate confirmation. Another way is through the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, which allows the appointment of somebody who's either been presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed to some other position or has been serving in that agency for 90 days, or through the interim process where someone gets to serve for 120 days. Lindsay Halligan meets none of those qualifications. They already had their go at the 120-day interim with Eric Siebert. And so because there is no path for appointment, I think there's a very strong argument here that Halligan's appointment is illegal. We're going to hear arguments about that in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals today regarding Alina Habba, and that may give us some insights. But of course, this case is pending in the Fourth Circuit as opposed to the Third Circuit, so we could see different outcomes there.
Yeah, and we're going to circle back to the Alina Habba of it all because that is percolating in the background. But Mark, what are you watching for from Comey's defense and from this case more broadly? Because we started our last hour talking about how this is happening in the court of law, but it's very much a case of public opinion and court of public opinion as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, before we get to the Ali Habba of it all, I love that phrase. I do think that, look, I mean, the legal parts of this are complicated. They're multi-layered, and I don't pretend to have any of the authority that anyone else on this air right now has. But I do think that the crux of this is not so much a selective prosecution, but this is playing out in a way that we have never seen before, which is a president of the United States not whispering his enemies list at all. I mean, basically being extremely public, extremely fulsome about who he wants punished, and basically that going directly everywhere, but also directly to the Justice Department, to the FBI, and what have you. And this is, it seems to be a central part of his narrative. I mean, punishing his enemies. I think at some point, this will probably play out in a lot of different courts over a long period of time. But you do sort of have to wonder, what is the political benefit of vindictiveness, of revenge, when you are effectively sort of heading towards lame duck hood and the economy is still in a pretty rough place, and people are obviously want the president and want the Republican Party and want the leaders of Washington to focus on the economy and other issues.
or even just getting the government started again. You know, maybe that's just me as the senior congressional reporter here, but that's definitely another thing I would add to the list. You know, we've talked about her a few times here, Alina Habba. And David, as we mentioned, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals is hearing arguments now in a case that argues that she, a former Trump attorney, was not lawfully appointed to serve in her new role. So what is the significance of this as it ties into looking at the way we're talking about Lindsay Halligan? Habba's sort of like 4 steps ahead in the legal process on, are you appointed rightfully, lawfully or not?
I think it's not good news for Halligan that the rulings so far about Alina Habba have raised questions about how Trump has been appointing people. And the broader issue is the power of the president. A U.S. attorney across the country, there in every state, has to be approved by the Senate. It's a formal nomination process. It's a key thing, having their review and their consent. And that isn't happening with all these interim appointments. So, you know, and the whole broad, you know, one of the themes of the Trump presidency is increasing presidential power. So it's like so many other issues, this will end up with judges in the courts. So it is very important to see how the ruling is in the Habba case, because it will impact possibly the Comey case as well. Yeah. And just going back in history, one of the ways that the classified documents case was thrown out, this was back in Florida against the special counsel Jack Smith, was that the judge there ruled that Smith had been improperly appointed as a special counsel. So this may seem like a technicality to people, but these rulings can have an enormous impact on these cases.
We've got a lot to get to with this great panel. I want to bring in MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, who's been tracking all of this for us. Also here, MSNBC political analyst and former director of the DOJ's Public Affairs Office, Anthony Coley, is on set with me. And our national security and intel analyst, Michael Feinberg, who recently resigned from the FBI under pressure because of his ties to a Trump critic. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ken, I'll just start with you really broadly. What are we watching for in today's defense motions?
Good morning, Allie. We expect Comey's lawyers to attack this case on at least 2 fronts. One, they're going to say that the U.S. attorney, Lindsay Halligan, is not properly serving in her role because of the Federal Vacancies Act. It's a complicated argument. Essentially, she had a predecessor who was the interim U.S. attorney who served more than 120 days. And they're going to argue that the clock didn't start again. So the interim U.S. attorney has exceeded the allowable time under the law, and therefore she's not properly the U.S. attorney, and therefore the case should go away. The more interesting motion, perhaps, is going to be the way they attack this case on the grounds of selective or vindictive prosecution. And that will just be the opening salvo in that effort, because in order to make that case, they're going to need to get a lot of discovery. They're going to be asking for all the records in this case, all the messages to and from the White House and the U.S. Attorney's Office, all the internal Justice Department communications, to be able to make the case that this prosecution is mainly happening because Donald Trump wants to punish James Comey. Allie.
I want to come back on the discovery front, because I think there's potentially some threads there that folks might look ahead to with intrigue. But Anthony, first to you, how do you expect the judge to approach these requests? And honestly, how soon could we get a decision?
Well, prosecution will have about 2 weeks or so to file a response, and then the judge could rule on this by Thanksgiving, give or take. But big picture, Ali, the reason we are in this moment is because of what the president has said, right? Mm-hmm. Presidential words matter. They carry weight. They move markets. And the defense is right to use these words as proof points as to why these charges aren't justified, right? We used to live in a time where presidents didn't comment on criminal matters in the court of public opinion because they were afraid. They respected the court system, and they respected the court of law, right? And that's what's so disturbing about this moment, because we got a president now who doesn't.
But let alone, and I want you to contrast the DOJ that you worked in and this DOJ now. The Merrick Garland Department of Justice, much to the chagrin of some Democrats that I spoke to, really did the work to try to show that they were independent, that they were putting distance between themselves and anything that might be a politically problematic prosecution. That is now out the window and then some. Plus, you've got the president saying, I am the chief law enforcement officer. I mean, as someone who worked at Main Justice,
that's not normal.
Your reaction?
That's not normal. Listen, the real contrast is between what Donald Trump is doing right now in Watergate. Today, and you will appreciate this because you're a history buff, today is the 52nd anniversary of the Saturday Night Massacre. That was the moment when President Richard Nixon ordered his Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor who was investigating the break-in of the DNC at the Watergate complex. Those two individuals, they refused and they resigned. Contrast that to what's happening right now, right? You had career prosecutors in this case who followed the facts and the law. And what the DOJ says, these kind of post-Watergate norms, is you don't bring a case unless there is enough evidence to obtain and sustain a conviction. The Trump-appointed U.S. attorney running that office agreed with the prosecutor. Donald Trump fired that guy, and he put in place Lindsay Halligan, right? And so we're in a moment now that's actually worse than Watergate, in my opinion, because the president is putting people in place who are ignoring the facts, who are working around the law, and are putting people in place to enact his political agenda.
Well, I do think on the Lindsay Halligan thread, it's going to end up being important here, Michael, for a number of reasons. Ken, of course, outlined the way that Comey's own team might try to argue that she was unlawfully appointed. That could have key ripple effects, not just here, but for other acting attorneys as well, right? I'm thinking for New Jersey, for example.
Yeah, and there's actually already been a flurry of litigation in New Jersey by criminal defendants arguing that the indictments or complaints against them are not just facially legally valid because this person acting as U.S. attorney is not there legally.
This is a bad day in court for Trump regarding the Comey case, because what Trump is going into a case with an inexperienced lawyer, and there's a chance that not only does the malicious prosecution argument hurt Trump, because it's not just going after Comey, how it happened, with charges that are pretty weak. You have to contextualize it with the Letitia James charges that are also weak, and that also seem motivated. Less black and white are the John Bolton charges. There does seem to be some merit in the charge, but the timing is also suspect and does play into the broader narrative. But remember, it's not just, they charged all three of these people at the same time. With James and Comey, the lawyers refused to do it. Those lawyers were gotten rid of, basically, or they refused to participate and left, or the narrative is unclear, but I think in some cases they were gotten rid of. They bring in this new lawyer, and then she immediately, and she doesn't have a lot of experience as a prosecutor, comes in and starts charging Trump enemies. And now it turns out that her appointment may be illegal. And to me, whether or not that automatically invalidates the case against Comey, I think if I go into a case with a prosecutor that might not even legally have the job, that's going to hurt me in front of the judge. And that's going to only intensify the suspicion that this is an unfair trial, like in the elements, like on the basis, not specific arguments made in court that the jury must disregard, but that the cake is already baked, and it's fundamentally baked with, this unfairness into it. And so this is something we haven't even really seen. Like, look, Trump's appointed cronies before, but a potential prosecutor not legally allowed to hold the job, that's bad even for Donald. And it's everything he accused Biden of. He cooking the books to get Republicans. That's what Trump's doing to Democrats and to Republicans like Comey.